to Assistive Technology Hot Corner, your one-stop shop for everything assistive technology. Please sit back and join us for some friendly banter, news and notes of interest, and of course assistive technology tips and tricks. Here are your hosts, Mike Mo and Israel Cazares.
So we want to welcome everybody to our monthly Assistive Technology Support Group meeting, and it is the month of October. And most of the time, we talk about strictly assistive technology stuff. And we're still going to talk about it tonight to some degree, but we're going to tie it to employment opportunities and how you can best prepare yourself for that opportunity. Of course, as we all know, October has been designated as National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And we all know the statistics of 70% of the blind community does not currently work. And while that is a staggering number, there's a lot of different reasons. But there are things you can do to prepare yourself for the opportunity to work. And we have a very special guest with us tonight to discuss some of those things. And she came to us a couple of months ago and asked if she could present. And we really loved the idea, Israel and myself. And we had a meeting a couple of weeks ago to discuss the topic a little bit more. And the more she talked, the more excited I got about what she's going to present tonight. So I'm going to bring you on. Jennifer Wenzel is from Beyond Vision, and she helps and is one of the main recruiters with Beyond Vision. She works in their HR department, and she is well versed in talking about all of this stuff. And so what we're going to ask you all to do as we do this tonight is we're going to ask her to present, and then we're going to take questions once she is done. And so you can raise your hand during the course of it. We'll see that, and we'll be able to call on you once we open it up for questions. Now, what I will say is that the one thing that we're going to do, let's see, just one moment here. Yeah, we're going to do that. Let's see. There we go. So just wanted to make sure we have everybody muted so we don't get any background noise. So one of my first times to host a Zoom meeting, so bear with me. One of the things we want to do is let her finish her presentation, and then we will open up the floor for questions like we always do. And we'll make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to talk to Jennifer. But it's a pleasure to bring her on, and I'm really excited about what she's going to share with us. And so this is fun. I'm looking forward to hearing it. And we have a big crowd tonight. We got 15 people or 14 people, not counting me, in our meeting. So Jennifer, I'm going to find your name in the list, and I'm going to unmute you and let you get started. But again, I want to thank everybody for being here. And for those of you who are listening to the recording, we appreciate you taking the time to join us as well. It's always good to have new people on. And I see some first-time people showing up, which I love that as well. So I want to welcome all of you. If I start naming names, I'll forget somebody. So Jennifer, I'm going to ask you to unmute by pressing Alt-A on your Zoom meeting so that we can hear you. And I'm going to ask you to take it away. So we appreciate
Hello,
you.
everyone. Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay?
We can.
I think I unmuted. Okay. Well, first tech test is done for the night. I was able to unmute, so that's a good thing. I am the recruiter for Beyond Vision. I've been the recruiter since January. And before that, I worked at Blind Incorporated in Minneapolis. I've worked at BISM. I've worked at Colorado Center for the Blind. I've essentially worked in blindness training, skills training, helping people train for employment. And now I'm on the other side of that, an employer that's hoping to hire blind people and sometimes sighted people. What I'm going to talk about tonight is just some tips, some things I've been thinking about and kind of pulled together into a presentation. It is by no means a be all end all of this. It's a framework for discussion. We could talk for hours and days and probably weeks about all of this, but this is just some things to think about, some things, and any of the examples I give or the things I like warn you to be careful for are not meant to offend anyone. They're sort of based on general things that have happened, but they're not targeted at any specific person. So there's my caveats of that. So I have three kind of sections that I wanted to go over. I've kind of roughly divided things into three categories. And the first one is talking about first impressions. And the second one is talking about sort of skills on the job, sort of the soft skills, the social skills that help with upward mobility and just help in general. And then the third part is incorporating technology. I may have technology in other parts of it as well, but definitely incorporating technology into all of this. So the first, they always say that there's only one chance to make a first impression. That's probably, you've heard that a million times, and it's true. And the first way you make that impression is with your resume. So you want to use, and here's an assistive technology thing, you want to use your JAWS and your typing skills and your word processing skills and make the best resume you can make. But don't stop there. Get someone to proof your resume. Get several people to proof your resume. Having people proof your resume does not make you less of a blind person, less of a good blind person, less of a skilled person. Sighted people need their resumes proofed too. As you read your own work over and over and over, you start to miss things. And there are really common things that a spell checker won't catch. If you write that you were a manger or an assistant manger, your spell check will think that's a word. I mean, obviously you meant manager, you missed that A, but spell checker won't get it. I mean, a good proofreader hopefully will. And I will tell you, I've seen it in blind people's resumes and sighted people's resumes. Manger is a really common one. Also, costumer service instead of customer service is another really common one. Again, the spell check won't catch it, but it's there. Or misspelling suite as in office suite. SUITE is how it's supposed to be spelled. SWEET is really good. I love sweet things too, but that is not what you're using when you're using Microsoft Office. So just really make sure people are proofreading it, formatting it, making sure it's formatted appropriately. You have some eye-catching fonts, some fun things going on. Not too much. You don't want to make it too busy, but you want a visually appealing resume. And I just found out the other day from a recruitment course that a lot of people are doing applicant tracking systems, and apparently PDFs are better for those systems to read and find than docs. So that's another thing you might want to learn to save it as a PDF when you're all done, a readable PDF. Or you can scan it and OCR would read it as well. So the next way you get to make your first impression is you might get a chance for a phone screen or an interview. Either way, a lot of that first impression is about your attitude. You want to be confident, you want to have good posture, be engaged, and you want to have that fine line between being confident and being really arrogant. It's really okay to say that you don't know something. You can spin it to a positive, like, I've never experienced that, but I'd love to learn. Or I don't know the answer to that question, but I'll have to look that up. And maybe even cite where you would look it up. I'm going to Google that. It's better to do that than to try to bluff it and act like because generally an interviewer will ask a follow-up question and you're going to get tripped up and it looks a lot worse and it's a lot more embarrassing. You don't want to talk in a real passive, soft, kind of whiny voice about things. You might have a really rough life. You might have had a really rough day, week, month. I mean, it's been a rough year, or a couple years, I guess, couple years now with COVID for a lot of people. And that's really too bad. But the interview is not a chance to dwell on the negatives, to be sad, to be upset. You don't want to be fake upbeat because that shines through, but you do want to be a more upbeat version of yourself, your best self. You want to smile a lot. You also want to, there's different theories about disclosing your disability, whether you do it before or during or how that works. But no matter what, if you're talking about your blindness or your focusing on it in any way, that's fine. But then you want to show your added value. Blindness is not your only value. Even if you're going to get a job at a place that hires blind people, you've got other value beyond your blindness. You might have technical skills. You might be a person that can lift a ton of stuff, and you might be the fastest assembler in the world. Focus on those skills too. Don't dwell on your blindness. Don't dwell on the negatives of your blindness either. If you feel like you're going to need an accommodation, that's fine to talk about, but that's not what the whole interview is about. You also want to show your added value. Things like your problem solving skills. You might have better problem solving skills than some people. You might have a really good memory. I used to have a really good memory. I could remember phone numbers like nobody's business. It's kind of gone away, but you could talk about maybe you have more patience. Um, you know, blindness can be something that has actually helped you more than hurt you, but that's not your only thing. After your interview, phone screen, whatever you have done, continue to be a motivated person. If they contact you with paperwork or a question or have a phone call, follow up promptly. Answer your phone if you can. If you can't, have a voicemail with a professional greeting. It could be the standard with your phone number or your name. That's totally fine. But have something that's good. Don't have a real crazy jokey email with a lot of cussing on it, or voicemail with a lot of cussing on it. This is not the time for that. You also want to make sure your mailbox is not full or that it's been set up. I get a lot of people when I try to phone screen that their mailbox has not been set up and it's impossible to leave them a message. Don't do that to people. Be a person that's accessible. Answer your email. Make sure you're looking at it and answering it appropriately. Make sure that your email address and your phone number are updated on your resume. I've gotten resumes where, the phone number is not the person that I was calling. So apparently they haven't checked that. So, make sure it's all right before you even send that. I know I'm kind of backtracking a little. The other thing I did forget to mention about the interview, sorry, going back there, is to make sure that you're dressed professionally, dressed for success. Really check and make sure whatever you're going to be wearing is right, is not stained or inappropriate. Find out the dress code where you're working. That's a really good thing. And I never feel like it's a problem to be sort of a cut above for the interview. But if you feel uncomfortable, if you're interviewing and you think, maybe I shouldn't have worn this suit to interview for production, you could say, I'm comfortable dressing. You could just address it like, I'm really comfortable. Like, these shoes might not be the shoes I would wear. I would wear, appropriate shoes for where I'm working. It's great to check if you're going to be using your camera, and you really should if you're doing a virtual Zoom interview. It's kind of like walking into a real room. A lot of people treat it like that. So try to use your camera if you can, and use someone to help you align that camera, make sure you're seen properly. Check it out beforehand. Be ready. Don't be popping on at 10:01 for your 10 o'clock interview. It's still okay if you log on a little early and you're not totally sure about your camera. I always think it's okay to say, hey, can you see me okay? Am I lined up okay? Just to check. They know then that you're motivated, that you care. But make sure that you're checking that out early. If you're in an interview in person, try to get there early, or maybe go the day before and kind of scope out the situation, like the building. Probably don't go in the office and stalk people in the office. That wouldn't be good, but scope out the building and know kind of where you're going to be going that day. Always show up for your interview. I know that sounds like a no-brainer, but it is becoming an increasing problem that candidates do not show up for an interview. If something happens, communicate. I cannot emphasize enough in this whole process how important it is to communicate. Really be ready for that interview. Be motivated. I dress up even for phone screens when I'm looking for jobs because it helps get me in the mindset. I dress up for virtual interviews. If you're only dressing halfway for a virtual interview, don't talk about it. I truly had a person talking about how happy they were not to be wearing pants. It made the interview really awkward. So just, be ready, act like it's an in-person interview, be really excited about it because that's your impression. And the last thing I'll say about the whole first impression thing is if you are trying to eat while you're doing a phone screen or a virtual interview, it will be extremely noticeable. No matter how quietly you try to eat, people will notice. And if you're on camera, of course, they'd see it. But I can't tell you how many people have phone screened while chomping on chips. It's awful. It's really distracting for the screener, and it just does not make a good impression. So eat beforehand, if you need to take a drink, that's totally fine, but don't be slurping, don't be eating soup, just you can live for a little while you're phone screening. So now I want to go to sort of the social skills section. And this incorporates technology a lot. One thing I would really tell people, and most people probably know this, but knowing how to use your calendar is really important. No one will remind you of your interview or any appointment you've got. So if you get a calendar invite, you're able to accept it. That's great. And your calendar reminds you. I live by my calendar reminders. It's a really important part of my life. I have them on my watch. I have them on my phone. Actually, I have them on my work phone, my personal phone, and my watch. So I should make it to places on time in general. You also want to have a reliable way to wake up every day. I know that sounds goofy, but you want to have a good system for that. If you need to set 5 alarms to get you out of bed, if you need an alarm that shakes you out of bed, get that, because nobody's going to call you and say, hey, so-and-so, come to work. It's your first day of work. It's your responsibility. And if you need somebody to call you and wake you up, that's your business. Just make sure you arrange that, because, the employer shouldn't have to do it. You also need a good way to manage your time, prioritize your time. Keep yourself motivated. This is a really important thing in the virtual workplace. You don't want to be sitting around not doing your work and then trying to do all your work at the last possible minute. So find ways to keep yourself motivated. If that's moving around your home, if that's, dressing up, that helps me. If I dress as if I'm going to work, it seems to kind of help me. And I work in my basement, so I go down to a separate floor. That seems to help me. Find out what works for you. If you hear about an opportunity at work, taking it and you want to try and help out, or, try to take that initiative, say, hey, I could do this. Or if you hear about a promotion and you're really interested, you don't have to wait for someone to come ask you. Go and find the appropriate person, take the initiative, write an email, make a phone call. The worst that can happen is someone says, I'm sorry, I don't think you're a good fit for that, or, oh, we don't need your help this time. The best that can happen is that people see that you're excited and motivated, and you get more opportunities. When you're virtual or in person, it's great to connect with coworkers. And, your initial connections may be about blindness related things. You may have a great dog, or you may need information. That's totally fine. But then find those connections beyond that. Maybe you like certain books, or maybe you like sports, or maybe you like technology, or, whatever the case may be. Maybe you're a bird watcher. I don't know. Whatever that is, or you have, maybe you like theater or movies. Find those connections. Food can be a connection. Coffee can be a connection. But and you should always take your turn bringing the donuts or bringing the snacks. You might be the person they buy for at first because you're the new one, but then you need to, pay that in return. And again, communicate with your coworkers, find ways to communicate, especially if you're virtual. It's a great way to stay connected. Do a little Teams chat, do a little email. And there's that fine line between being completely disruptive and derailing everyone, and communicating and trying to connect, and try to keep that. But don't keep yourself in a little hole, in a little isolated spot. That's easy to do, but keep reaching out beyond your comfort zone. Let's see. Oh, another really important thing is, however you do it, you should have a reliable way to keep track of information. So whether that's taking notes in Braille or print or typing notes, those are all valid ways to do it. I'm not telling anyone how they should do it, but if someone gives you an important phone number, an important piece of information, you need to write it down so that you're not asking them 20 times. If recording is your medium, you should let people know that you're going to record them, because some people aren't comfortable with that, or aren't as comfortable with that. Or if they find out later that you recorded them, they might feel uncomfortable. So just say, hey, I need to record that phone number, or I need to record this information. Is that okay? Or this meeting. Just asking is always a good thing. And it's totally okay to ask questions. And it's I mean, sometimes it's okay to ask a question twice, but you want to, as much as you can, try to have that information so that you're not asking the same things over and over, and you're figuring out where things are and the answers. So the last section I wanted to touch on is incorporating technology. And I want to say that smartphones are a great thing, and they're smart, and you can use them for tons of things. I use mine a lot, but a phone will not do all the work you need to do at work. It is really, really important to have good PC skills. And I would highly recommend learning JAWS if at all possible. It is a very powerful tool. It is the corporate standard for screen reader. I know there's some problems with some corporations using NVDA because it's open source, and so that can create some security issues. So knowing JAWS is really important. You know, NVDA is great for a backup, especially, and it might be great at home, but JAWS has really gone down in price. The yearly license is not horribly exorbitant, and so and JAWS itself has so many free training opportunities available. They have webinars and information and just gobs of stuff that you can look up. You could even Google stuff and you'll find it for JAWS. So learn as much as you can. And if you don't remember all the keystrokes, look them up, figure it out. But it is a really, really powerful tool. Touch typing is also so important. Being able to do that, because not just to know where the letters are, but the keys on the keyboard, because there are so many great keyboard commands. And no matter what your visual level is, using those keyboard commands can really make you efficient and help you out. And you will never go wrong if you are touch typing. You want to have Microsoft Word and PowerPoint skills, and you can always keep learning. Don't feel like, oh, I'm really good, and stop learning technology. Technology changes. So sometimes you have to change with it. You know, somebody was just asking about Windows 11, and maybe you don't update right away, but eventually you will. I've talked to people that say, oh, I use Windows 7, I'm never going to change. Or I use Internet Explorer and I'm never going to change. Unfortunately, you know, we may not like change, but we have to keep up and we have to do the best we can. We can't just be good at tech for blind people. We have to be good at tech for the working world. And, you know, I would say that sometimes, unfortunate as it is, we have to work a little harder to prove ourselves. And so don't be caught in that trap of, oh, I'm not going to change. I'm not going to work, you know, any harder. Tech isn't what will get you a job, but it will keep you a job. Well, it might be what gets you a job if you're working in tech, but generally it's going to be what keeps you a job, and it's going to be what helps you advance. And it's going to be what helps you get new opportunities as things change in the workplace, and being able to adapt to different tech. If, you know, if something's accessible and you're supposed to be adapting to it and you're dragging your feet, and someone else is jumping ahead and getting excited about it and going at that tech opportunity and going with the change, they may surpass you if it's time for a promotion. Take advantage of all the free training you can, the webinars, resources like this group. There's great Facebook groups. And now I know JAWS has a lot of things on Clubhouse that I've listened to, and they're great too. So take advantage of all that stuff. I mean, you don't have to live, eat, sleep, and breathe JAWS, but if you can take advantage of it and keep getting yourself better and improving your skills, that is great. Let's see. I think I've covered all my, and you know, going back to the phone and braille displays and other tools you may have, those are all great things to, you know what's more the new standards, keep your phone up to date, keep learning about new apps. If you have a braille display, you know, pick and choose the one that really works well for you and keep using that to the best of your ability. But I always like to have a backup plan. You know, tech, like we were talking about earlier, there's always going to be tech difficulties. So for instance, if you know how to use Zoom on your computer, that is great. And you're going to do really well with that. Learn how to use it on your phone too, because the day your computer crashes and you can't do Zoom, you still might have to be at a really important Zoom meeting. Teams, I find Teams sometimes easier to use in the phone app, but I also do use it on the computer, and I keep trying that once in a while. So go back and forth. It's okay to have both if your company allows it, and if everything's, you know, secure and everything. That's a great thing. I always have a backup, and sometimes I have a backup to the backup. And also, don't be afraid of technology. To some extent, technology is about troubleshooting and learning things by doing. And as long as you're careful and you know what you're, I mean, you might want to try it. Sometimes I try things on my home computer first before I do it at work. But sometimes within reason, you can try something, especially if you know how to get back out of it. Or you can maybe put in a help desk ticket and say, this is what I was thinking of doing. Will this work? And your IT might tell you that's fine. Or you go through it with them once and then you learn it and you can keep doing it on your own. So, and you might be able to show other people how to use technology. And that's okay too. If there's something, the other thing is don't fall into the trap if somebody says, you know what, this isn't accessible for you. You can't do this. Maybe it's not completely accessible, or maybe others have struggled with it, but maybe you can find a way to make it usable. So sometimes if it's something you really need for your job, maybe it's a website, maybe it's something you really need and you want to work on it, sometimes it's okay to try it for yourself and see if it works. If people in a Facebook group are complaining about how it's not accessible, that might not be your experience. People use accessible in a lot of different ways. And sometimes it means it's just not easy or it's not usable. Sometimes it means it's completely inaccessible, but sometimes it's best to really figure that out for yourself. And sometimes what people are saying is they've never tried it. They don't know if it would work. And so they might be cautioning you against it, but if you can work on it and are like problem solving and can figure it out, you might be able to help someone else and you might be able to do more on your job. So now I've talked a bunch and thrown a lot of information at people. And I guess it's time to open it up for questions.
Okay, Jennifer, I appreciate it. You guys can hear me? Jennifer, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay.
I
Okay,
can hear
good. Cool. All right, Israel, I'm going to ask you to unmute your self. That way you can sort of help us navigate this. So what we're going to ask you to do, this is kind of unusual, but this way we don't have everybody talking. We have a big crowd tonight, which I was very glad to see. And so I want to thank everybody for being with us. What if you have a question and you want to ask Jennifer or us, and we will continue the recording until all the questions for her are answered. If you will raise your hand, we will get to you. So if you're using Zoom on your PC, you can simply press Alt-Y. That will raise your hand and we'll see it. If you're using the app on your smartphone, there is a way to do it. I believe if you go to the bottom right of the screen, there's a more option. And if you double tap that, you'll see some more options. And one of them will be raise hand. And if you'll double tap that, we'll be able to see that your hand is raised. So if you'll do that, I will go through the list of the participants here and we will see if anybody has any questions. So certainly bear with me because I'll be going through the list here. And Jennifer, I appreciate what you said about the technology piece. I think that was a very well said, and I think that's some really good information to share, because you can never learn too much about technology, and kind of made me feel good because I've said that a few times to people. So thanks for sharing that. I thought that was good.
I enjoy
One
technology.
question I would ask is regarding resumes, style. What is the best style to use when producing a resume for people? Because I know we get all sorts of different ones, but what is the standard, or is there such a standard for resumes when you're submitting them?
That's a really good question. I know that if you are going for a federal job, there is a standard, and I don't know enough about it to speak to it, but there is a certain federal resume format. So if that's a job you're looking for, you should research that and figure that out and make sure that you're within that standard. I think the other styles depend on what you're looking for and what your experience is. So I really think if people don't have a lot of work experience, which is totally fine because people have to start somewhere. And maybe you have a lot of volunteer experience, but or maybe you don't have a lot of experience, but you have some really good skills. I think skills resumes are a really good way to go. So putting a lot of your skills, it's putting your name, address, phone number, your contact information first. That's pretty standard always. I love that when it's like right there. Some people I have seen put it further down. I think it's better to put that right out in the open, who you are, where you can be reached. And then putting skills. So bullet points of, organization, creative, problem solver, things that are really good that you've learned and gathered from different positions. And then you might put your education, and then you might put volunteer experiences or your most recent work experience. No one has to know if that's your only work experience. You can put just one if you've listed a lot of good skills at the top. Always I think it's pretty standard. Your most recent work experience should be first. And usually if someone will, list what they've done and then the dates that they've done it. And that doesn't have to be, January 1 this year to, February 1st. This you could, but most people just write, 2017 to 2019 or 2018 to 2021 or whatever the years are. And if you are listing, usually too, you want to put duties or things that you did in that work experience. And again, that's bullet points. This is not the time to write sentences. It's the time to write short, strong bullet points. Just a couple of words with verbs first. Sorted items, or now see I'm blanking on good, strong words, but answered calls, not I got on the phone and helped people out, solved problems for customers. You want to be as strong and concise as you can.
Jennifer, I have a question regarding when you were talking about the social aspect of doing an interview. A lot of us, especially people that are blind, totally blind, may use guide dogs sometimes. I know I have a guide dog. In your experience, what should we be aware of when we're interviewing? And that's kind of a two-part question. So there's that part of the guide dog, and the second part would be, what should I really try to avoid doing? Because sometimes I know some of us tend to rock a little bit or move or try to, or how important should I make it a point to make eye contact as best as I can with an interviewer? If you can speak a little bit on those things.
Those are both really good points. So the guide dog thing, I think one thing to be careful of is having I know dogs shed, this is a thing, this is a fact. And so trying not to have dog hair on your clothes, having your dog look neat and clean, not have an odor. And guide dogs are generally really well behaved. So bringing it in and doing what you would normally do with the dog, it's still not okay. If you wouldn't let Joe Blow down the street pet your dog as you're walking along, if the interviewer starts to pet your dog, it's still okay to say in a very pleasant way, not "don't pet my dog," not screaming at them, but respectfully telling them that you don't want your dog petted is still okay, because they need to know this could be the person that works with you, and you don't want to start a thing where they're always trying to pet your dog or distract your dog. But you also can say you don't want the conversation of the interview to be about the dog. You might, I don't know. I've not had a guide dog, so I'm not sure, but it might be good if you're bringing the dog to an interview to let them know, just because some people there's some cultural things around dogs or fear of dogs. And so at least maybe having someone be prepared for that. Not that they can't have you in there, not that you shouldn't be able to bring your dog, but just maybe that extra preparedness might be good, so that you're not wasting time having people upset because there's a dog there and nervous about the dog. And of course, reassuring them that your dog's going to be completely fine, because most guide dogs will just lay so quietly under a chair that no one will know that they're there. And of course, you're showing a lot as you walk in confidently with your dog, find your seat. That's a great travel tool. I think it is really important to have eye contact as much as you can, keeping your head up, keeping your posture good, a head down and looking off, or it can signify that you're not focused or you're not paying attention. So as much as you can, you want to try to make eye contact. For Zoom meetings, I just try to make eye contact with the screen where the camera is and do the best I can and try to smile. And every once in a while, maybe move my head left or right just a little. Rocking, if you can keep it as minimal as possible or not do it, that would be really a good thing. Being still and kind of leaning forward seems more attentive. I'm a fidgeter. I get real fidgety with my hands. So when I'm interviewing, I try to be real conscious of that and try to keep them still. When I did interviews for my Beyond Vision job, I actually needed to do Zoom on the phone because I didn't have a computer. It was my work computer, and I don't feel it's right to use my work computer to look for another job. So I use my phone. And the good thing about that is I had to hold it really still so that I could be seen properly. And it kept me from fidgeting. So if there's little tricks you can do to kind of keep yourself, putting your hands on your lap under a desk when you're on a Zoom meeting, if you're a big fidgeter like I am, can be helpful so that you can keep your hands still. Keep your feet still if you're a foot jiggler, because I tend to do that too. In an interview, I try real hard not to do that. So just trying to be really someone that's making a good impression, but not looking super, super stiff either, which can be hard. You try to be relaxed, try to relax your shoulders before the interview, shrug them, take a deep breath. A friend of mine told me to smile for as long as I could before my interview, and that actually helped. And so that kind of gets you in this sort of positive mindset and makes you smile when you're actually on the interview. So those kinds of tricks can be really helpful. And keeping your voice pleasant and engaged, at a good volume. And that's another thing you can check beforehand. You don't want to be yelling at people, but you also don't want to be talking so soft they can't hear you.
So anyone who has questions, feel free to raise your hand. Again, with Zoom, it is the Alt plus the Y key together. So Alt Y will raise a hand, and we'll be able to see it, and just keep it up. And we'll call on you and we'll ask you to unmute. Now, if you're on your smartphone, you'll go to the more options, and Israel, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but if you go down to the more option on the bottom right-hand side of the screen, there, if you double tap that, you will see other options, and one of them is raise hand. And if you'll just double tap that, we'll see it if you're on your smartphone.
That's correct, Mike.
Okay, I was making
Feel
sure.
free to correct me and make comments if I'm wrong, because I'm not a dog user. So maybe I'm off base on some of the dog stuff. So, or maybe something I've said has, you totally disagree with me. I'm okay with that. It's all about discussion. So
right. So in Israel, if you don't mind looking and seeing if there's a hand raised, I would appreciate that too. And you let me know. I would ask this question because I think it's one of those that we debate on numerous occasions. I've heard it debated and on different mail lists, and people can get very animated about whether or not you should let an interviewer know. And of course, being a blind agency, if you're interviewing in a place like Beyond Vision or IMB or wherever, this is kind of an accepted understanding and expected thing. But in the real world, maybe not so much. So when to say, I am, blind, I use a computer, and because it can become more about your, well, that's amazing type stuff, and less about your skill than your interview. How do you have some ideas or some thoughts about how to avoid getting into that trap and focus more about what you can do and what, and less about how you do it, I guess would be my thought.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing, and I've done different things. So I used to think, and I still sometimes think, that I never wanted to make a big deal about being a blind person. Like, to me, it's just normal life. And I wanted it to be a very minimal part of my whole interviewing. When I was interviewing, I did work for public schools. And when I was interviewing for public schools, I didn't want them to focus on my blindness. I wanted to just focus on what I offered, what else I brought to the table. And so I didn't tend to tell them, and I'd show up for in-person interviews. And obviously for me, when I show up for an in-person interview, because I'm totally blind, I have light perception, but it was very obvious that I couldn't see. So and there was sort of it almost backfired on me in some instances, because I feel like there was sort of a shock factor, and then there was like a nervousness factor on the interviewer's part that they had to cover up, and we had to sort of relax and go from there. And So I don't know. I almost feel like in some ways it made it a bigger deal. So, and in this virtual world with phone interviews and Zoom interviews, I think it's easier not to say that you're a blind person. And it's tricky because the other thing is I want people to know that even though I'm a blind person, I can do the job, and I might want to talk about my braille display or my computer, and this is how I would do it. And I try to do that when they ask if I have any questions. Sometimes I say, I know that as a blind person, you might have questions about how I would do this job, and this is how I would do it. I use a computer with JAWS, and I use a braille display, and I usually bring my braille display with me and show it to them. And let that conversation be. And often they still won't ask anything because it's illegal for people to talk about your disability. And I mean, if you open it up, they can, but they still may be nervous about it. But I feel like at least they know I'm open to it. But I don't have a hard and fast answer. I really think it depends on the job. For a job at a place like IFB or Beyond Vision, it's a bonus. I mean, it's a plus in many of our positions to be blind. So don't be afraid to disclose it there. And I think at some point you have to talk about it, because to do a job, you probably are going to need some sort of accommodation, whether that's magnification or speech or something like that. I think it's dishonest to get hired and then say you need 20 things to accommodate you to do the job. But I guess, I mean, I've known people that work it that way as well. But I think that might sour your relationship as you're starting to get to know your employer. Of course, it's totally different if you were hired and then you suddenly have a drastic change. Will you need new accommodations? Of course, you should ask for them. But I think at some point you need to talk about the fact that you're blind and try to make it as open a conversation as you can, but not the focus. I like to do it later in the interview process if possible, after I've talked about my great, how great I am and how much they really want to hire me.
Steve
Cool.
Gaspike has his hand raised.
I see Rebecca also does, and I think hers, I'm going to pick her first because
Rebecca can say that I'm lying about all this because she's the other half of our HR team.
So Rebecca, I'm going to push this button here, and now you should be able to unmute and ask your question. And then Stephen, we will come to you next, so you can be ready for that. So go ahead, Rebecca.
No, I was just gonna echo Jennifer. One, good job, good presentation, good information, and I like what you shared about with Mike's question about, do you disclose, do you not, and I think it's just kind of a delicate balance. I know for me personally, I've never necessarily done it ahead of time, but definitely make it part of that interview. I mean, I don't leave the interview without giving voice to being blind and what that means and what that looks like. And I think, like Jennifer said, really spinning it in a way of, for me, it's always been like, okay, I am blind, but these are the tools. This is the assistive technology. This is how I would use it for this job specifically to be able to do, and keeping it focused that way.
One thing I forgot to say is that you always should try to do research about the place that you're being hired, and that can help you spin it too, where you can say, I noticed that part of my job would be to do X, and here's how I would do that. I've really been thinking about how I would do X as, with my assistive technology or whatever. That can be helpful. It shows, number one, that you were motivated enough to look up some information. And number two, you've been thinking about it, and, you've already kind of solved your own problem, because the employer might be sitting there thinking, oh, I don't know how, they're going to do this. One of the things in the schools was, how would you help a kid with art projects? And I am so not crafty. I know there's lots of blind people who are crafty, but that's not me. And so I tried to think of ways I would help, and recess, how would you help them on the playground? And so I tried to address those things, but I don't think I've ever done it necessarily ahead of time either. I've kind of tried to make it part of it, but I don't know that that's right. I mean, I may change that, because I do feel like sometimes when I've walked in, there's such a, like, oh my gosh, that maybe that's not such a good thing to start out.
And Stephen had his hand raised too.
I was going to say, I don't know if I'm trying to unmute and mute my microphone here with my headset, so I hope you guys can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
I was just going to say, Kim Flanagan, who's sometimes attends our meetings here, one of her responsibilities at the Little Red Schoolhouse here is to make sure that the kids are safe. And I think of she does a remarkable job at that. But I've always wondered, how the parents, I know they must have questions, but they do trust her, and there's a good reason for it. So I'm really,
Mhm.
that is a good question. And I know we've got some other folks. I saw Anastasia was on here, and that's something that she probably could speak to as well. She's blind and she has children and had kids and was visually impaired throughout most of their, adolescence. So those are things that we all deal with, and some people just don't know how. But anyway, I'm going to let Stephen ask his question. And so what I'm going to do, Stephen, is I'm going to ask you to unmute. You should be able to do that on your side. So go ahead with your question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes,
Sure can.
Awesome.
Steven?
Awesome. Okay, hey, Jen. Good presentation.
Thanks.
Comment and question. One thing I would add after you go to an interview might be to, because I've done this a few times, send a thank you note.
Oh, good point. Yes.
Mhm.
I can't believe I've done that too. And I love it as an interviewer. I love getting those thank you notes, honestly.
Mhm.
It's an
Yeah.
extra little bonus of being motivated. Another thing on that same vein is write a cover letter. Even if it's not required, it's an
Mhm.
extra little plus. It helps your resume stand out and you stand out.
Mhm.
And that's another place where I've seen people or I've heard people disclose blindness is in their cover letter. So that, something to think about and do it in a way that says like, oh, as a blind person, I've really learned to be a problem solver, spin it in that kind of that positive framework. But yeah, just as a mention, like, hey,
Mhm. Yeah. My question is, and I don't know what you've seen in recent years. It's been a long time since I've been, interviewing. So I'm sure things have changed. But one of the big sticking points was like, oh, okay, you need this computer equipment, with et cetera, et cetera. Um, who's gonna pay for
who's going
that?
to pay for it?
Yeah.
Yep.
I know. I would talk about like DVR. If you're a DVR
Mhm.
client, if you're not, that can be kind of dicey. I mean, maybe you can take your own JAWS; it'll work. But then there's also the aspect of, is JAWS going to be compatible with their system, and how do you determine all that? So, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's always something to talk about. It's if you are a DVR client, mentioning that some companies now, because of such a push with diversity and inclusion and so many shortages in the workforce, there's a lot of buzz about the untapped workforce of people with disabilities. So companies are becoming a little more willing to do some accommodations. There's also, and I don't know a ton about it, but there's something called the Jobs Accommodations Network that can help companies pay for different things. And I think the JAWS being compatible with their system is where you talk about how you may have resources that can help their IT people navigate that. And good IT people, well, some of them I think might be excited for that challenge and to see what happens and are going to look it up and figure it out, and or they'll find ways to ask questions and hope that. And JAWS is becoming more and more compatible with more things as well, which is also helpful.
I would add to that, Jennifer, and again, I want to just point this out. I keep repeating this. I don't want anyone to forget. I don't want to leave anyone out. If you want to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand, press Alt-Y if you're on a PC. If you're on a smartphone, you go to the More options. It's located at the bottom right-hand corner. You double tap that, and there's a hand raise option there. But I would just add to that, that's where relationships are really important, because if you can strike a good balance between you and an IT person, and they speak your language and they understand that you're not going to bring something to their network that's going to harm it. That is the biggest concern. Being in the IT role now, and Israel can probably attest to this as well, it's tough to have somebody come in and say, yeah, I just want to run my computer and I want to run my stuff. Yeah, I don't know about that. And so people get on the defensive a little bit. So know a little bit about what JAWS is and tell them, this is a program that runs and, allows me to see the screen. It works with Windows. We don't have any trouble with it. It is not an open source program because it's not. And those types of things you can say to them, and that will maybe soften them some. They may very well require you to be in their presence while you're doing any sort of testing and all of that sort of stuff. But if you have that opportunity, certainly it's a good idea to kind of know a little bit about what the IT part is and where they're coming from too, and have an understanding. Don't get upset if they're like, well, we're not going to let you do that. Understand where they're coming from. They have a network to protect.
Right.
So if you go at it a way where, well, can we test it? Do you have a test environment? Could we just look at it there? And as Jennifer said, more and more compatibility is taking place, mainly because of the types of applications we're using. We're using more cloud-based stuff that helps us a little bit because it's not standalone applications. That's not always a given, but sometimes it is. We have a better shot if something is web-based or app-based type stuff that has an actual way to, you can activate what's called the virtual buffer so you can see stuff. That doesn't mean it's labeled any better in some cases, but it just gives us a better fighting chance.
And Mike and audience, I want to remind you guys that if you want to raise your hand, that's Alt-Y. To put your hand down once you've asked your question is Alt-Y as well.
Yes.
So if you
And
want
if
to
you
hit
forget,
Alt-Y,
we'll lower it for you. But thank you, Israel. I appreciate that. Do we have anybody else in the queue? I haven't seen anybody. I'm going to lower Steven's hand there. So just bear with us, folks, as we look at this. Jaws is a little slow at telling us.
And the other thing about testing stuff is JAWS does have that 45-minute demo mode that people can access. It might be a good way to test things. I think that can be loaded anywhere. Is that? Well,
yeah,
maybe not anywhere.
That is
I think
true.
it's a great point to bring up, Jennifer, that and I like the idea that Mike was talking about testing environment. You can also load JAWS on a thumb drive that can be plugged into a secure environment, such as a sandbox. So there's a lot of ways. And if you learn these terms, now you don't have to be a tech expert. So this is where I would jump in and say, you don't have to be a network expert or an IT administrator. But if you learn these words like sandbox, jump drive, 45-minute demo mode or 40-minute demo mode for JAWS, free, you want to mention the word free,
Free. Free's a good word.
For JAWS, you're going to put a lot of tech people at ease because tech people, first of all, they want to protect their system, they want to protect their environment, and they want to make sure that the company is not going to have any adverse, they want to avoid any risk at all cost. So you want to bring your expertise, which is, you're the expert at being blind, is what I would mention.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a good point too. If they allow you to bring your own device. Now, some companies might have a policy on devices. So try to find out what the policy is, because some companies might be against bring your own device. But if they are open to it.
Your laptop. Something I would like to throw in there, and maybe we can find out, but some companies will not let you bring your own thumb drive and plug it into the computer because of security risk.
Yep,
But there's a website, and I don't remember this, but I used it like 10 years ago when I would go to the public library to access the computers. There's a website that you can go to and you can use JAWS on a demo mode online, like just by logging into the website.
Yeah, I think that used to be called System Access to Go. I'm not sure if that's still a thing.
Okay. Well, too bad if it's not, because that could be something that might be accessible if they don't allow you to plug in a thumb drive because of security risk.
Yeah.
It's normally a second meeting when this stuff happens. You're not going to do unless they, be prepared, obviously. They may say, hey, well, let's go look at it and see. But usually though,
but if
it's a second meeting.
just bring your own laptop and demonstrate if anything, if they don't have a way for you to do it any other way.
And if you bring your own laptop to that point, you don't have to connect to their network.
Right.
you just
You
turn
could
it
just
on.
show them, this is
You
how it
just turn it
works.
on and show them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let the
You have
let
your
the-
braille display, you have your laptop, like, hey, this is how I do it when I'm, and you show them that you have some computer skills. This is how I get into Word, whatever.
And I would say two things too, just to kind of finish this thought. We are at just 3 minutes till, so we may stay a little bit longer than 7, but not long, because I don't want to keep Jennifer or anyone else. But this has been a wonderful meeting, and Jennifer, thank you again for sharing. We really appreciate it. But I think two things I would say. One, as Jennifer pointed out earlier, invest in your technology. Pay the $95 for the annual subscription. If the absolute worst that can happen is you'll have it for yourself, but you'll also take full advantage of all the training, because all of that comes with JAWS, and we could never, ever, ever have enough training. There's new things that are introduced every single release. There's coming one in here in a couple of weeks, and it's going to be awesome. There's some great stuff that's going to help those folks who use it in CSR roles particularly. But the other thing I would say is, when you have a job, it's easier. This is maybe a little known secret, but it's easier to get your state involved then, because then they see that you have a job and that you're earning money, and then they will go buy your stuff, because that equals a successful job placement, i.e. case closure. That helps them earn their funding. So play the game. You'll get your stuff. You'll get the expensive stuff, especially the Braille displays and stuff like that. But you won't get it if you don't invest in your career first. So if you're sort of wanting to learn more about JAWS than you have, and maybe your skills are not where you would like them to be, then invest the money. It's less than a Netflix subscription per year. And we all have a lot of those, streaming services and things like that. If it means something to you and it's important enough to you, take the dollars that it takes and invest in your career. A lot of us have done that at some point in time. And if you do that, you're going to have a better opportunity to be successful, because you're going to have those skills that you can utilize.
Absolutely.
Mike, I also too want to jump in and thank everybody for their time. It's been unbelievable discussion, great discussion. And Jennifer, again, thank you for doing this presentation for us. We talk a lot about employment, and obviously that's the reason we do these meetings. We want to give people the tools that they can use to be successful. And to Mike's point earlier, learning never stops. Even Mike and I, who are work in accessibility, we actually do eat, breathe, and sleep and eat JAWS and whatnot, and we have to, because that's job security for us. And but also it allows us to have information to share to others. I know I can't speak for anyone else, but I know certainly Mike and I have had these conversations of giving back to the community. We've been blessed and fortunate in many ways. I know I have. And to share a little bit of what I've learned throughout my years and working, my working life is awesome. So I've really enjoyed this conversation. I don't see any other hands raised, so
I don't either.
Questions?
Put everyone to sleep.
No, I don't think
have
so.
A good night.
Well, this has been great. Again,
So-
Mike, thank you for facilitating this.
Yes,
No
thank
problem.
you so
Awesome.
much. I'm so glad. I take away little tips every time we have the tech meetings. So
I would
appreciate
I would just say in closing, because we're going to wrap it up and give everybody their evenings back. We want to thank everybody for listening, either live or if you're listening to this recording, if you've never been to one of our meetings and this is a first time attendance, want to encourage you to join us. The third Thursday of each month, we're here from 6 until 7 Central, 7 until 8 Eastern. Figure out the other time zones: 5 to 6 Mountain, 4 to 5 Pacific.
Pacific.
I can't go much further than
Hawaii, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Give me the GMT, Mike. Give me the GMT.
I think it's 23. I'm not sure. I don't know. Anyway, really happy to have anyone who comes in. And what we try to do is this is a kind of atypical meeting because we really focused on one topic. Usually what we do is talk about some of the latest AT news, assistive technology wise. We try to update you on new releases of software, hardware, things that we are seeing that's working great, that's not working great. And then we open it up and let you guys dictate the conversation. We could talk about anything from technology for work to technology for the house, for cooking, anything from cooking to cleaning to, balancing a checkbook to trying to figure out how to work an Excel spreadsheet. We do it all. And there's not a question we can't try to answer. We've learned a lot, all of us have. And so we invite you to join us third Thursday of each month, 7 to 8 Eastern. We're here at night so that a lot of our folks can join. And if you're interested, you're listening to the recording and you want the live meeting information, send myself an email. That's mmote, that's MMOTE at ifbsolutions.org, or you can email Israel Kazatis at IZURITA at beyondvision.com. That's Izarita at beyondvision.com. And again, Jennifer, thanks. It was a wonderful presentation. We appreciate you coming on and doing this. And thank you for what you're doing for the blind community. It's wonderful.
And that's a wrap. Thank you.